Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Women's International Beer Summit. This is the session with the National Honey Board. So I hope you guys have been enjoying the other sessions and interacting with all the fun people that are online here. I have been absolutely blown away of this community, this event, and everything that has helped make everything just work behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. I am Rebecca Wilkie with Cuvée Marketing. I am on the team with this summit and also with Queen of Beer. So this has been so fun, making everything come to life. We were having a little difficulty with the screen share. So Alison Conklin is with the National Honey Board. She is going to be our presenter today and taste through the honeys. So instead of trying to figure out how to get her on the screen and her presentation, I am just going to bring up her presentation. You will hear her voice, and then we will come at the end and you will get to see her face to face. So if you guys have a question, use the Ask a Question. Some of the people have been getting kicked off of some of these sessions. Just refresh, or if you need to go log out and log back in, that seems to work as well. So here we go, and enjoy your honey tasting.
Thank you, Rebecca. As Rebecca said, my name is Alison Conklin, and I'm here with the National Honey Board. And before I even get started, I would really like to say thank you to the Women's International Beer Summit for inviting me to come here and speak today. I've been with the National Honey Board for the last 6 years and have worked with all kind of audiences, but truly my favorite audience to work with is brewers, but specifically female brewers. Being a female myself, this is something that is really close to my heart. I have had the opportunity to work more and more with different female-run organizations such as Pink Boot Society and then now the Women's International Beer Summit. And I want to say a huge thank you for you all hosting this summit to give females that voice and the education to bring them to the forefront of the industry. So thank you for having me, but thank you for hosting this today. So the National Honey Board, if you don't know who we are not a supplier. We are not a distributor. I am not someone running around with sales slip trying to make you buy honey. What I am is a representative of the honey industry. I like to think of myself as just educational, a resource for whatever audiences I am talking to. The National Honey Board is an industry-funded group. So for every pound of honey, I should say, big beekeepers that is sold or imported into the United States, we make just over a penny and a quarter for. This in turn allows us to work on education such as events like this with consumers, with food service and retail supermarkets to learn more about the importance of honey. I specifically work on the ingredient marketing side. So again, I work a lot with brewers, bakers, distillers, and packaged good manufacturers. So everyone from the bakery next door to big guys like Frito-Lay and Pepsi. Today, what we are going to be learning about is honey, honeybees, and honey beer. Not only do I want to hit on the technical aspects of brewing with honey, but the story of how honey makes it from the bee first foraging for nectar to your finished beer. It's a really beautiful story, and you know it's super important whenever you're making a beer to have a story that goes along with it. And so honey really offers that perfect marketability for your end product. And then lastly, why honey? Why honey and alcohol? But really the better question is, where should we even start? Honey is actually one of the oldest sugar adjuncts in alcohol. We know honey has been around since the ancient Egyptians, from hieroglyphics to archaeologists now finding jars of honey in pharaohs' tombs, to even times of war, where a lot of times soldiers would leave out fermented honey for their enemies to find and drink and get drunk, and then they would actually attack their enemies while they lied there intoxicated. But if you're wanting to look specifically at the oldest recorded sample of honey used in alcohol, you can go all the way back to 900 BC in Jiahu, China, where archaeologists have actually swabbed ancient clay pots and found traces of honey and alcohol, or mead. Now, today, I'm not going to focus on mead. And actually, if you didn't catch it earlier today, I highly encourage you to go back over to Alison Schramm of Schramm's Meadery presentation on Mead 101. She's going to know specifically mead so much more than I. I am more of an enjoyer of, of mead, whereas she can give you all those fantastic technical resources for mead. But even thinking back, let's go back to 2019, what seems like the glory days now of being able to go to in-person events like Craft Brewers Conference. A lot of times when brewers would come up to our booth, they would say, "Oh, so you're here to talk about mead." And no, mead is honey, water, and yeast. It's fantastic and we love it, but that's just not the focus for today. Then people would say, "Oh, so you're talking about braggots," which, if you don't know, braggots are like almost like a perfect hybrid of a beer and a mead. It's a mead that is made with cereal grains. But I'm not talking about braggots today either, because braggots can get slightly tricky because in some states it still requires you to have a wine license to make a braggot. But I'm here to talk to you about honey beers. And really, the evolution of honey beers has evolved so much. We first look at Belgium. They were the first to really perfect this with their saisons and other craft. The gold standard really of this is Bière de Mille by Brasserie Dupont. Fantastic beer, uses honey not just for sweetness, but to dry out their beer. Then you look at probably your first example of a honey beer, which is Honey Brown by Genesee Brewing. Really, it seems like 9 out of 10 times this is people's first experience into honey beer. But today we find ourselves with so much more innovation and inspiration for where honey can take us, such as this honey ginger lime sour beer by Cascade Brewing Company in Portland, Oregon. There's a lot that can move forward. And really, brewers are recognizing this. When we look at our ingredient marketing scope and who's buying the most honey, beer is. Beer is buying about 15.2 million pounds of honey just in the United States. And then if you look at the entire alcohol segment, liquor and distilled spirits are buying another 10.1 million pounds of honey. So you guys are buying a ton of it, you're using it, and it just, the innovation just keeps growing and growing. But honey is much more than just a sugar source or a brewery adjunct. There's a lot more to the story here. So I want to start with us kind of going through the bees to the honey to the technical stuff. And we'll see how much we cover in an hour. But first, honeybees are just an amazing insect. The earliest evidence of bees dates back over 100 million years ago to Patagonia. And it at first was thought that bees were not native to America. We thought that bees were brought over to the New World in early 1622. But now there's actually disputes of it as we continue to learn more about our own country and keep researching for more. We've actually been finding fossils that date back over 14 million years ago that show extinct species of honeybees. This just shows how amazing this insect is and how much more there actually is to be learned. So from a very rich history to an essential worker, honeybees are very essential to our ecosystem. More than 35% of the foods Americans consume come from honeybees. Many of your fruits, many of your vegetables, all of your almonds, and many of your nuts and seeds are possible because of honeybees. There's actually about 90 crops that we commonly eat that are solely responsible because of honeybees. And really, if you want to go into a whole nother wormhole, honeybees are much more important for your brewery, just more than just having a honey beer. But if you think about any of those fruit or vegetable beers that you make, say that you use a nut beer, a brown porter, or any of those kinds of things, those beers wouldn't be possible without bees. So then looking at honey, honey is a very highly complex substance. What's in honey? the list just kind of seems to go on and on. There's carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, prebiotics, acids, volatile organic compounds, bacteria, yeast, goes on and on. All of these things have an impact on the complexity of your beer. But the best thing is that there's no manipulation or made by machines here. Honey is just simply made by bees. So this is where I feel like I should have had the big, a big flashing that says interactive. So if you were one of the first 100 people who signed up for the summit, you should have received 3 different honey samples. And we're going to walk through those now. If you didn't know, honey actually has thousands of varietals, all depending on where bees forage for nectar. In the world, there's about 3,000 different honey varietals. Just in the United States alone, there's over 300 different honey varietals. So however you want to look at this, if you're tasting along right now, you're tasting 100th or 1,000th of an example of what's really all out there. And each honey is very unique to its terroir. Everything from the color to the aroma, to the flavor and viscosity. If I had you all in front of me right now, I actually would be conducting this tasting like I would a wine or a beer tasting. We would be looking at every aspect of this honey, looking at that color, dipping your nose into the glass and looking at the aromatics, to then tasting, looking at, feeling the viscosity of the honey, and also examining where this honey came from. So I wish I had you all in front of me to do that, but bear with me, or I should, bear pun. Bear with me as we go through this. The very first honey I want to talk about is orange blossom honey. Orange blossom honey, of course, is going to come from citrus groves of Florida, California, and also Texas and Arizona. Orange blossoms are a fantastic source of nectar for bees. Seldom are there even enough bees to take advantage of all the nectar available in an orange grove. So if you're tasting along with me right now, or have the opportunity to grab these honeys later and taste along with the presentation, I first want you to really get your nose into this honey. Really breathe it in and think of what notes do you get. And don't be afraid if you're first smelling this honey and you're like, well, it smells like honey. There's always a reason that we start somewhere. This is going to be what you're probably most commonly used to with honey. It's a nice, beautiful, fruity honey. There are citrus notes in there and even some lemon zest. And then as you move along, you get the aromatics of this honey, and we move forward to the flavor of this honey. And this is a pretty true to aromatics to taste honey. A lot of those citrus notes carry through. A lot of the fruity notes just carry right through. And again, one of the most common honeys, that means that it's also pretty readily accessible for your brewery to use, also meaning cost efficient. So if you're thinking of using a honey, this is a great place to start. Then we take a 180 here, and we go to our second honey. This is buckwheat honey. And if you don't have this honey in front of you, this honey looks like motor oil. It does not look like, if you've never seen buckwheat honey before, you would think that I handed you molasses or something completely different. And if you look up on the screen right now, that's actually a picture of a buckwheat flower, which is actually white to light pink. But when the bees go to forage for this nectar and bring it back to their hive to make honey, it just creates this super dark, super robust honey. This is actually a pretty readily accessible honey too here in the United States. It's most commonly grown in New York and Pennsylvania, but it does grow in other parts of the country, such as California. We actually grow about 70,000 acres of buckwheat a year. And it's a very, very giving flower for bees. An acre of buckwheat can produce enough nectar for bees to forage and produce about 150 pounds of honey. Now, again, if you have this one in front of you and you've popped off the cap on your honey bear, you are probably getting an instant hit of aroma in your face. And you're probably thinking again, okay, this is not honey, because this is so funk forward. There are notes of barnyard, notes of horse blanket. It almost, a lot of people, when they put their nose into it, their heads just kind of fling back. Again, nothing added to this. This is just purely what the bees are making. If you go to taste this honey, even if you spoon it out and you watch it, it's a super thick, viscous honey. Pours out super, super slow. And even the mouth feel, it really feels like you can chew on this honey. And a lot of those notes carry from the aromatics to the taste on this one as well. And I know saying barnyard and horse blanket may not encourage you to want to taste it, but on the taste, you might even get notes of fermentation or dark chocolate covered cherries. Typically, the darker color the honey, the more robust in flavor it's going to be. So definitely something to keep in mind when you are brewing with honey. If you are buying just based off color, you're going to get a lot different notes from this darker colored honey than you would necessarily the orange blossom honey. Both have fantastic notes to it, but both completely different. Then we move over to our last honey, which is meadow foam. So all my Pacific Northwesterners are probably, woohoo, this is my honey, which you guys would be right. This meadow foam flower, different from the buckwheat and the orange blossom, where it's pretty readily accessible in the United States. The meadow foam flower only grows in Willamette Valley, Oregon. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible to get or that it's super, super rare, but it only grows in one area. And after you taste this honey, you're going to understand why it's not always accessible, because people who get their hands on it want more. So for those that don't have this honey, you're probably like, well, what is it? What does it taste and smell like? When you open up the cap and get your nose into this one, you get a very confectionery smell to it. Lots of sugar forward. But as you move into the taste of this honey, it tastes like toasted marshmallow. And that's just the bees foraging for this nectar. That's it. But it produces this candy bomb. It tastes like you just went outside to your fire pit and made your own s'mores. So there's so many things that honey can do. The versatility of honey has a slew of possibilities for beer and different uses. Of course, the first one is going to be sweetness. But you can also add a level of complexity to your beer with honey. One of my favorite examples, and probably one of my favorite honey beer or beers out there, is Dance Language by Oxbow Brewing Company in Portland, Maine. What they have done is they have taken a base beer and made a 4-pack made with 4 different honey varietals. So you can compare each of these honey beers against each other, whether it be their raspberry honey beer, their blackberry honey beer, their blueberry, or even their wildflower honey beer. Honey also has the ability to elevate hop notes. Honey has become very commonly used in IPAs because it can raise and enhance floral notes without giving an overly cloying sweet note, because honey is so fermentable. Honey can also make beers super crushable. I think about this earlier today. I was mowing my own yard, and I wish that I just had Indeed Brewing Company's Mexican honey lager or Mexican honey light lager. It's just super light, super crisp, and feels like something I should be drinking as I'm mowing the lawn or sitting out in a lawn chair. Honey can also be used in bottle conditioning, which I'll be sure to talk about a little bit later in the technical side. And then also honey has a great opportunity for marketing. I'm probably the most biased person here, but I don't think there's anything more beautiful than seeing honey dripping down a can or bottle, or seeing the beauty of bees or combs or so much more that is possible when brewing with honey. So speaking of that, I want to go a little bit more into those bees then. Are there different types of honeybees out there? Yes, there's about 20,000 different known species of bees, but only 7 types of honeybees are recognized. So when you think of carpenter bees, or you're thinking of bumblebees, especially bumblebees, a lot of times there's that misconception that bumblebees make honey, which they don't. They're great pollinators, so we definitely love them, but they do not make honey. Here in the United States, there are 3 most common honeybees here. There's the European or Western honeybee, there's the Italian honeybee, and the Africanized honeybee. The most common of these is the Italian honeybee. They're very docile, and so they're not very aggressive toward beekeepers, and they acclimate very well to different climates, which is very, very important here in the United States because we do have so many different regions that have such varying temperatures and climates. So really, really great that we have these honeybees that can acclimate themselves to different areas. So what makes these honeybees unique? What makes these 7 species different than the other 20,000 that are out there? Well, the very first thing is that honeybees have a secondary stomach or a honey sac. So they have their first stomach, which is used to eat honey and digestive system. But this secondary stomach is filled with enzymes that the bees deposit the nectar from flowers, which the enzymes break down the nectar to what we know as honey. The second thing that makes honeybees very unique is their ability to build and live in colonies just like ants and termites. So when you're out looking at flowers, walking around, you'll see those isolated bumblebees or solo carpenter bees, but you won't really see honeybees without their families. And honeybees are always going to return back to their own hive. They don't really intermingle with other hives. It's not like they're going to go visit their neighbors. They always want to go back home to their colony. And then lastly, not only can what makes honeybees special is the ability to make honey, but also store it. So this means that, the bees are making the honey and they're able to make their own food source, but also they are able to form comb to which then they store the excess honey to eat or store for during the winter months when there isn't blossoming flowers out there. So this is where honeybees live. You've probably seen a couple of these maybe on the sides of roads or when you're really out in the country looking at farms. This is a photo from the largest beekeeper in the industry in the United States. This is not all of their hives. They have several thousands, but from backyard beekeepers to the largest in the industry, it all pretty much looks the same here in the United States. When we say a colony of bees, we are talking about one stack of these white boxes in the picture. Those white boxes are called a hive. And inside of the hive, there is about 60,000 bees. So even in those pictures where there's only about 2 boxes on top of each other, there's about 60,000 bees right inside of there. The more boxes stored on top of a hive is the more honey the colony has produced. As the colony produces honey, the beekeeper will add more boxes to provide more room for the bees. So looking at these 60,000 honeybees, there's 3 types inside of the hive, and you can tell that they look pretty vastly different from one another. The first one is the mom bee or the queen bee. You can see that she's very, very dominant in size, has a very elongated abdomen, and there's only one of her. There can only be one queen bee per colony. Then there are about 200 men or drone bees. So you might be thinking, where are the rest of these bees? The other 59,799 of those bees that are inside the hive are female or worker bees. So when you're asked who run the world, It's girls, and you know it. So the queen bee, that's where I really want to start when diving in even more into this hive. The queen bee is the sole egg layer, and she can determine the sex of her offspring. So she also makes sure that there is that balance of few men and a lot of women inside the hive. So again, she is the sole egg layer. And now you can see in the picture, this queen bee, that abdomen, it's super, super long. And that's because she has to be able to give birth to over 1 million bees in her lifetime. And in the busy summer months, she'll actually be laying eggs about every 45 seconds. The queen bee is very much a homebody. She only leaves the hive once in her entire life to go mate. And so in that one mating occurrence, she will have all the eggs that she needs for the rest of her life, which is about 3 to 5 years. If she dies, so does the hive, unless they make a new queen. The hive always has to have that egg layer inside the hive to keep the hive sustaining. So if you look on this picture here, most worker bees, drone bees, when they're being born, their eggs are put into a comb. But when the hive sees that they need to make a new queen, they make a queen cell, which looks like those two big peanut-shaped figures hanging off the bottom of the comb there. So what happens? Say that the hive's queen is aging, she's ill, she's missing, she's dead, she's unfertile, whatever makes her not capable of being a good queen for the hive anymore. The rest of the worker bees in the hive will start making multiple new queen bees because they need to ensure that at least one of them is going to survive and help the hive thrive. Now, this is where things kind of get a little Game of Thrones-ish. So the first queen that will hatch out of her cell, she'll come out and actually use her stinger and kill the rest of the unborn queen bees because there can only be one. Then the new queen and the old queen, they have to make a decision here. And the old queen has the option to fight or flight. So the queen bee, the old queen bee, can either fight to the death or she can just gracefully leave. Another reason why the hive might actually make another queen is because the hive is getting overcrowded, and this is called a swarm. So this is when the new queen will leave with about 20,000 of her daughters and go find a new location. So the rest of the hive is left to go and make a new queen to survive. Actually, if you ever have the experience to see a swarming, I've been in 2 different swarms in my time being with the National Honey Board, and it seems like something that should be super scary. There's tons of YouTube videos out there about it, but this is actually when bees are the most docile because they are looking for a new home. So don't be afraid of it. It's kind of like this. For me, it was a very overpowering emotional experience just to see all these bees flying around in the air trying to find a new home. They were just so busy and graceful and didn't really care that I was there, but just cared about the survival and their family. So looking at our next bee, the drone bee, this squatty little dude, you can see in the photo that he's a lot fatter, has way bigger eyes, and also he doesn't have a stinger. And he can't forage for nectar. So what good is he really? The sole role of a male honeybee is to mate. And if they do this successfully, it kills them. So as I mentioned, the queen bee will leave once in her lifetime. The queen bee never mates with her own sons or her own drones. She will go out and find a swarm of drone bees, which is called a drone congregation. And this is something that I haven't gotten to experience, and I really hope that I get to one day. But what happens if you find yourself in a drone congregation? It starts sounding like popcorn just popping in the air, because if that drone bee successfully mates with the queen bee, its abdomen explodes and it just sounds like popcorn flying off in the sky. So that's it. That's all that the male bees are used for. And that's why there's so few of them in the hive. And all that they do when they are in the hive and they're not mating is they're just eating the rest of the honey. So when it gets to those colder months or the worker bees are just a little too busy to worry about the men hanging around, the drone bees will actually get evicted from the hive. A lot of times you will find that either the bees will start blocking the front entrance of their hive so that the drones can't fit, or you will physically see worker bees drag the male bees out of the hive because they're no longer needed. So next is the worker bee. And this is probably my most favorite photo of honeybees out there. And that's because it really shows the worker bee in her truest form, always working, always has her head down, doing the next best thing for the hive. Worker bees are really the brains and the body of the hive. They make all of the decisions and do all of the work. And from the very moment that bees are born, they go through age polyism. They are set to work, and it is all instinctual. Right as they are born, other female bees, worker bees, her sisters, will come and clean her off. And then she's responsible for going back into the cell that she just hatched from and cleaning it out and getting ready for the next sisters to be born, help clean them off and clean up more cells. Eventually, bees will work through multiple different jobs throughout the hive, whether it is guarding the hive, maybe dragging out those drones, fanning the hive to bring down the moisture content, feeding the queen, and then eventually doing the big job out there, foraging for nectar. Another pretty amazing thing about worker bees and honeybees is that they can dance. And what I mean is that outside of primates and humans, honeybees are the only other proven life form that have a form of communication. And this is called the Waggle Dance. And so if you're looking at the screen right now, I want you to follow the green path. But what the Waggle Dance is, bees determine how to source their nectar based on the direction of the sun. So as a scout bee who is supposed to find nectar for the rest of the hive, she leaves and she looks at the sun. So if we follow this green path, we see that about 80 degrees away from the hive, from the sun, there is a nectar source. And we'll say that it's about 200 yards away from the hive. That scout bee will come back to the hive, gather around all her sisters, and start making a figure-8 dance to her sisters. So she'll tilt her body in about an 80 degree direction and say, hey, look, sisters, and she'll start waggling 200 yards away from the hive. There's a really great source of nectar. And she goes again and waggles her body to show that about 200 yards from here, if you guys all head 80 degrees that way, you're going to find some really great nectar source. So if you're really inspired by that Waggle Dance, I hate to tell you, there already is a beer out there named Waggle Dance. It's one of those things that everybody already always puts in the chat room. They're going to use that name, but unfortunately it's already used. But there are so many bee names, bee puns, bee everything out there that I swear there are more names for you to tap into. Next, let's look at the honey. So we talked about how bees are foraging for their nectar, but what is this entire process? Well, it's pretty simple. There's really only about 5 steps that go into making honey, and it's pretty much all done just by bees. First, you have that bee that visits a flower and extracts nectar and pollen. She's going to be storing that nectar inside of her, and as she's visiting from flower to flower, pollen will stick to her fur, and when she goes to the next bee or to the next flower, she'll bring that pollen with her and cross-pollinate all of those flowers. So honeybees doing the amazing work. So when that bee collects that nectar, it stores it in that honey sac, where the enzymes and bacteria start breaking down the nectar, turning complex carbohydrates into simple carbohydrates, mainly fructose and glucose. After the bee's done visiting all the flowers, it's going to return to the hive. and it's going to regurgitate that nectar from one bee to another. I know that sounds really gross, but if you've ate honey before, you've already ate some regurgitated bee spit. I hate to say it like that. Honey just sounds a lot nicer. But that bee, the next bee who receives that nectar is going to chew on it and then pass it to another bee. And this will actually pass through about 6 bees in about 20 minutes. This will evaporate some of the liquid and add more enzymes, bacteria, and yeast to the nectar substance. After this exchange, the bee will deposit the nectar substance into a cell. Now, this is still not yet honey because of the moisture content. Bees in the hive will change the content in the hive by using their wings to fan out the hive and evaporate the water content. Once the honey is down to about 17% moisture, the bees will put a wax cap on the cells and store the honey. So the entire process is done by bees, but this is finally where humans come in. And really all that they're doing is when beekeepers see that their hive has an excess of honey and still has enough where it could sustain itself, it will pull frames from the hive to extract. And what beekeepers will do is they will use, it's a pretty manual process. They will either use a hot knife or a comb to brush through the frames of honey and either hand extract all the honey or put it in a centrifuge extraction barrel and extract that honey to then put in bottles. But that's it. It's a very, very simple process done by bees, packaged for you. So when looking at the domestic honey industry, these stats are from 2019 as we wait to get all the results from 2020. But we produce just under about 200 million pounds of honey a year. And when you look at what are our top honey producing states, it's actually going to be the Dakotas, Montana, and California. And a lot of people are really shocked to hear that the Dakotas are our top honey producing states. But when you think about it, you have to think that bees have to have enough area to forage for nectar. Bees will travel a radius of about 3 to 5 miles away from their hive. So when you think of our more populous cities and states, there's not a lot of room for bees to go out and forage. Whereas in the Dakotas, this is some of the most untouched land in the country. So the biggest opportunity for bees to go and forage. So we produce about 200 million pounds, but our honey consumption in the United States is over 600 million pounds of honey. We just don't really have the ability to expand our honey industry in the United States because you have to think of land, accessibility, and then even our usage of pesticides in the country. So we have to import 2/3 of our honey. And if you're wondering where most of that imported honey is coming from, our top 3 imported honey countries are Vietnam, Argentina, and India. A lot of people are really shocked when we say India because it is such a populous country, but where India is the most populous is in its big city hubs. And outside of that, there is still a lot of forageable area for bees. But again, honey is just honey, and it's still the same process, but it does look a little different around the world. Again, this is the largest beekeeper in the United States. His hives are in the Dakotas and in Montana. But then if you bring it the other side of the world, this is a tribe of beekeepers in Africa. And I love to show this photo because this tribe actually empowers only female beekeepers. So it is all women ran, women produced. And this is actually where New Belgium gets their honey for their honey orange triple. They really like the mission here to empower females, and the honey tastes pretty great. I've had some of it myself. And then this is one of my favorite photos too of beekeeping around the world. This is beekeeping in the Himalayan mountains. These beekeepers are actually known as the last honey hunters. These are all feral bees. And for beekeepers to actually get this honey, they have to hoist themselves down on rope ladders and scale the mountains to harvest this honey. You can see that they have a large knife hanging from a stick and are cutting the comb to land in the basket. But if you also want to kind of freak yourself out maybe a little bit, bees here in the United States, those Italian and Western honeybees, they're only a half an inch long. But you can see in this photo a whole bunch of black specks. Those are honeybees. Those honeybees are about 2 to 3 inches long. So those bees are a lot different. And that guy doesn't have any gloves or shoes on. So it's just pretty incredible how beekeeping looks around the world. But no matter what, all of this honey is 100% honey. It's all the same great, inspiring, complex substance that you can use in brewing with honey. So let's get technical. There is so much more to talk about with brewing with honey, hours in fact. So let me dive into this, but please know that there is so much more out there that I'm happy to share with you. So when looking at data from brewers, every single year we host a honey beer competition. This competition does not focus on the best honey beers, but the best beers made with honey. We have some data pulled from our 2019 honey beer competition. We would pull from our 2020 competition, but the numbers were a little lower because of COVID. But again, this competition brings in a lot of breweries from around the country, and we follow up with questions to learn more about brewing with honey. The first question that we ask is, where did you add the honey? Not surprising, most breweries are using honey on the hot side, either at the end or the middle of boil. However, we are seeing that there is an increasing amount of breweries using honey on the cold side, especially in our 2020 competition. You can also use honey, though, in the barrels, for bottle conditioning, and for multiple points of the brewing process. Another question that we ask is, what percentage of honey is used in the recipe? Looking at the chart, there's about 24% of our respondents said that they are using less than 5% honey. But the most amount of brewers, about 38%, were using about 6 to 10% honey. But then also you can see that there was about 21% of respondents that said they were using 11 to 20% of honey, and about 17% of respondents saying that they use more than 20%. So there's a pretty good spread and distribution out there depending on what you are trying to accomplish. So then we ask, what is that primary role of honey in the beer? And we made brewers choose one primary reason so that we could pin down the main point of addition. And 50% of brewers said to impart a depth of flavor. We have aromatics as number 2, followed by drying out the beer, raising the ABV, bottle conditioning, and then a collection of other reasons. So what did we learn? There is no right or wrong way to use honey in brewing. It used to be that we would be asked how to brew with honey, but now it's where should we brew with honey, where it be in the hot side or the cold side, and how it would actually impact the beer. And then we say, well, what are you looking to do? So when talking about brewing with honey, you can really add it at any point of the brewing process. It is not an ingredient where you have to use it just one way. It would be pretty boring if that's all my job was about, but I'm very lucky to be able to help brewers find different and innovative ways that they can add throughout the process. So the most common place is going to be on that hot side. So we're going to start there. So I should say tip number 1 when brewing with honey is that you should always wear a bee suit. It just makes for a lot of fun and great pictures. But in all seriousness, why would you want to add honey to the hot side? This is basically if you are not wanting that residual sweetness and you don't want to worry about the microbes in honey or having to heat treat your honey. So adding honey on the hot side, mainly in the boil, is a balancing act of denaturizing those enzymes and microbials. But also, You don't want to boil the heck out of your honey. If you add honey right at the beginning of the boil, you're going to scorch your honey and waste an expensive ingredient. You're going to burn out all the flavor, aromas, essence, and ferment out all that sugar, which makes it just a wasted sugar, which is fine if you just want to dry out your beer, but you could have used any sugar adjunct then. So you want to consider when you want to add your honey in the boil. We recommend adding it as late to the boil as you feel comfortable. We found the earliest you should add it is 10 minutes left in the boil. At this time, you won't have any of that residual sweetness, but you will preserve those aromatics, that essence of honey that gives you the perception of honey in the beer while keeping a light, crisp body. Another consideration is how much honey you should use. If you use over 15% honey, you will want to pay attention to your fermentation profile because it may trigger catabolite repression and the yeast may not be able to reach that maltose where you have a stalled out fermentation. So what's your expectation when using honey in the boil? If you just want to raise the ABV of the beer and lighten the body out, then you're going to want to maintain your traditional mash temperatures. However, if you're wanting to raise the ABV of the beer, but you're afraid of thinning out the body of the beer too much, you can increase your mash temperatures, which you can see in this chart. And it will give you a similar body. So this is what you would want to do if you have a fear of drying out the beer too much. You are going to want to essentially bring it to a hotter temperature quicker and hold it at that hotter temperature. This is the way that you will get it, that you will boost in ABV, but you won't dry out the body, but maintain a similar body. We have a research paper on this, which we will be sure to share with you, and the trials that we conducted for how we got these results. Again, as the National Honey Board, we see ourselves as our resource and education for the brewing industry. So any of this information that we have, we are more than happy to share that with you. So using honey in the boil, what is your finished beer going to look like? You are going to get a slight decrease in beer color. You are also going to create a balance between honey and your targeted beer style. Again, you won't have any of that residual sweetness, but that minimal aromatics and perception of sweetness. And you can also expect to smooth out any bitter edges of hops in your beer. However, the longer you can wait to add the honey, such as the flame out or the whirlpool, you're going to carry over more of that honey essence. If I'm brewing with honey on the hot side, I'm not going to use that meadow foam honey. Meadow foam is a more expensive honey, and you will lose those toasted marshmallow notes and flavor because it's going to ferment out. You will still get some of that sweetness, but just lose that unique characteristics of the honey. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't use honey on the hot side. As we mentioned, the Beer de Mille by Brasserie Dupont was made with honey on the hot side, but with a wildflower honey, and to dry out the beer and bring honey aroma. If you're playing around with different varietals of honey and wanting those notes to carry through, you may want to visit adding it to the cold side. So, cold side edition. If you're wanting to preserve sweetness, add aromatics, or possibly carry in unique honey characteristics, this is for you. But when do you add the honey during the fermentation? If you add at the beginning, which we actually don't recommend, what's going to happen is you're going to add honey to your fermentation vessel. You're going to agitate it so you make it sure it is dispersed. And then you're going to pitch the yeast. Because the yeast is going to go after those simple sugars first, they're going to go crazy. It is going to be a robust fermentation that is going to essentially come out of the gates super hot. It's going to scrub out a lot of the essence of the honey because the yeast are going so aggressively after it. And it also has the potential to stall that fermentation because the yeast are so tired. Where we recommend adding honey on the cold side is either right at peak fermentation or slightly right after it. At this point, the yeast are already in a highly active state and will be able to balance the simple sugar profile of the honey without going crazy or completely drying out the beer, or tiring out and not being able to utilize all that maltose. So really either right at peak fermentation or right after it is what we found to be the best to add honey on the cold side. The big thing you're going to want to consider is how much you want to add. I know my job is to increase honey usage in the United States, but the best beers are not the ones that use the most honey. And I actually would be doing a huge disservice to the entire industry to tell you to do that, because we want to make sure that there are great honey beers out there. Not, we want to make sure that there's that quality over quantity. So don't add a lot of honey on the cold side. A little bit goes a long way. We think the sweet spot is that 5 to 10% range for a sweet profile. However, if you are looking for more sweetness, you can go up to 15%, but you will be getting that sweetness and great aromatics already adding it on the cold side. Another big consideration is to either agitate the honey inside of the fermentation vessel so you make sure it is dispersed properly, or you will want to dilute it with water and then add that dilution to the vessel. You don't just want to add a bunch of buckets or barrels of honey straight into the fermentation vessel without agitating it, because honey has a tendency to drop to the bottom, which will cause an absolute mess when you try to rack that beer out of the fermentation vessel. The last part that I want to talk about adding honey in the brewing process is conditioning. We actually consider bottle conditioning to be the next frontier of brewing with honey. This is something that a lot of home brewers have been doing because they can, and it is something cool to talk about, but we are starting to see a lot of breweries bottle condition purely with honey. Why would you want to do this? Because it is expensive. Do you want the priming sugar hidden in the background just for conditioning and carbonation? Then just use sugar. But if you are wanting the priming sugar to play a role in the beer, I'm going to go through some great tips for handling honey. And we can go through this pretty quickly because it's pretty easy. When you are storing and handling honey, if it's stored properly, honey will essentially never go bad. I can't 100% say that because you may not want to be tasting those honeys that came out of the tombs of the pharaohs, but it essentially will never go bad. For short-term storage, for less than 2 years, keep your honey at room temperature. Keeping it at that 64 to 75 degree Fahrenheit is perfect for honey. And minimize temperature fluctuations. Don't put it right next to an oven. Don't put it next to a refrigerator. Just try to keep it at the same temperature at all times. And airtight containers are a must. That is the most important thing. If you have your honey not completely closed, you can it can possibly start to ferment. You can collect dust and other particles, which will stimulate that crystallization. You want to keep your containers tight. Now, for long-term storage, if it's going to be more than 2 years before you use your product, you can freeze it. However, please, 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 please do not put just your regular jars of honey in the refrigerator. That's going to really speed up that crystallization process. This is only if you're keeping your honey for a long time, which most breweries, it's more of a one in, one out for their ingredients. So that doesn't typically happen. But if you do have bulk and you don't see yourself using it, freeze it. Over time, honey will start to darken and start to lose some of its flavor and aroma. So that's another reason why, if you're keeping it a long time, to freeze it. But again, most of you are going to be keeping it that shorter time. So crystallization of honey. For those of you that received some of the honey samples, you might have noticed that your meadow foam honey started to crystallize. What is this? This is a natural and spontaneous phenomena when glucose separates from water and comes out of solution. It's when these glucose molecules start sticking to each other or cling onto a speck of dust or pollen. Honey crystallization is most rapid around 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So whenever honey starts to get too cold. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and our temperatures just fluctuate like crazy. Actually, last Tuesday it was 70 degrees, and on Wednesday it snowed. So unfortunately, some of the honeys that were in my office, because we were not expecting that, started to crystallize just because it got too cold in my office. So really, if you're wanting to make sure that your honey doesn't crystallize, the best temperature is around 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Does crystallization impact your honey quality? No, it does not. There's very, very many times with even my own personal honey that I'm eating or enjoying from my pantry, it starts to crystallize just because it's been sitting there and the temperatures are changing. All you have to do is put your honeys in a water bath. Do not put your honeys in the microwave. This will scorch your honey and make you lose some of those aromatics and great flavor, but put it in a water bath. If you have just a small jar, my favorite thing is just to heat up a coffee mug and then put my bottle in the hot water after I've boiled some water. But if you are doing honey inside of your brewing process, some best practices, you can warm the honey by sitting it again in that water bath to make it more pourable and crack that lid because your honey will start to expand. Another thing is to avoid adding honey too quickly to the kettle to avoid scorching the honey. You can also use that mechanical agitation or recirculation of hot worth to dissolve that honey. Another good practice, again, dilute honey with hot brewing water, hot worth, beer, or deaerated water to help honey dissolve easier. Again, never leave your containers open. That's really what's going to cause everything to crystallize a lot faster. But lastly, for best practices, save some honey for the lunchroom because I don't think that there's anything more special when you can see those notes from honey share and go through the brewing process and you can tell that you added this amazing ingredient to your amazing product. So, like I said, this was a very, very quick dive into what's all out there with brewing with honey. There is so much more that you can learn. We host what's called a Honey Beer Summit, and we have 3 more of those planned out for this year. This is a 3-hour summit going really, really deep into everything that we talked about today. A lot more honey tastings, a lot more on the technical side, even more about the story of bees. If you're interested in attending, please go to honeybeersummit.com. Oh, and I think that I accidentally deleted one of my slides. What it was supposed to say is that we are hosting our 7th annual honey beer competition. In 2019, we had over 260 entries. Last year, we still, even with COVID, had 220 entries. And this year, we are capping our competition at 300 entries. This is a BJCP certified competition and absolutely free to enter. All entries receive completed judges' notes, and winners will receive medals as well as significant promotion through the National Honey Board and the beer industry. That website is honeybeercompetition.com. We try to keep things really simple. But also, this slide here, we have our 3rd annual Mead competition. So again, I encourage you to go back and listen to Alison Schramm's presentation about mead. And if you either make meads or are looking to make a mead, we are going to have our Mead Crafters competition later in the fall. The Honey Beer competition online registration closes July 30th. The Mead competition closes October 1st. So there's still a lot of time if you're interested in entering our Mead competition. That website is meadcrafterscompetition.com. So if I've left you completely inspired today and you're looking to source some honey, our website, again, keeping things really simple, is called honey.com. On there, we have what's called the Honey Locator. So either go directly to our website or you can go to honeylocator.com. It is your one-stop shop for finding honey. Whether you are looking for one of the varietals that we had today, if you are searching by quantity, if you are needing a drum or just 2 ounces, if you are wanting to find honey near you, you can search through our database for all those honeys. So thank you guys again for having me today. If you ever have any questions about honey, honeybees, brewing with honey, or just really want to share your favorite bee puns with me, please send me an email. My email is alison@honey.com.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm trying to bring you back up here. Hang on. Let's see.
I'm trying to figure out how to unshare my screen, but
I think you're up, and I think you're good. Oops, we keep switching.
oh no.
We have a bunch of questions. The chat has been going crazy. I know you have not been able to see that, but you are going to love it.
Okay, I am trying to figure out how to share my lovely face, or if you can see me, that's great. I just see my screen still.
I can see you, and I think you're getting a little echo from your presentation, maybe. I don't know if anybody else is hearing this. But I do want to pop in here really quick. I know a bunch of people have been waiting. I kind of teased out that we would be announcing the winner of the 10 pounds of honey. So we do have that person. I know they were watching earlier. I don't know if they're still on here, but Jenny Robbins from Seattle, I believe. You are the winner of the 10 pounds of honey. So we will get in touch with you and get that honey sent off to you. So Jenny Robbins, you now own 10 pounds of honey.
Woohoo!
All right. Hang on. You know what? I think I figured out what's wrong, Allison, on you.
Okay.
I don't think your video's back on your side. Here you come. There you go.
I'll believe you.
So here's Allison. Here's who's been entertaining us for this past hour. So fun. So I don't know if you can see those questions down below, if you want me to read them out for you. There were a couple. Let me see. The Brewers, I think it was in regards to when did you add some of the stuff? So the Brewers that did it to impart flavor, what stage did they add?
I might need a little more context to that if they're which brewers they may be talking about. Oh, when looking at our competition results, the brewers that did impart flavor, and what stage did they add that? I would have to do a little more looking into that because I just don't remember offhand. But Josephina, if you email me again, Alison@honey.com, I can definitely find some answers for those survey respondents. The next question there, have you had a brewer that has used 2 different flavors of honey? What flavor combinations would you recommend? Yes, this is actually pretty common. And the most common reason why brewers do this is if they are using a more expensive honey varietal. Meadow foam honey compared to orange blossom or buckwheat is going to be about 3 times the cost, if not more. So a lot of times if brewers are using a honey that has very strong and forward flavor notes, they'll combine it with a wildflower or a clover honey. A specific example I know of is Scofflaw Brewing in Atlanta, Georgia. They use Hawaiian Leua honey in I know it was a pineapple-inspired beer, but for them to source that much Hawaiian Leua honey, it was just too much. So they use wildflower honey as well. So when asked what flavor combinations would you recommend, it goes back to what kind of flavor notes are you trying to achieve, or if it's more if you're just looking for that cost efficient method there. So hopefully that answers that, Katie. In the cold side, are you just opening a sterilized container, or how are you assuring sanitation at that point? Josephina, I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm still doing a lot of learning myself on the brewing side. I am our honey expert. So that is a fabulous question as well. When you email me to ask me about those survey responses, please include that question in there as well, because I can get you an answer for that. Kristen asks, are any of the competitions open to home brewers? Unfortunately, not at this time. We would love to in the future. We used to assist with different homebrew chapters, but just right now, because we are expanding our competitions, we host a honey beer competition, our mead competition, and also a spirits competition. I think that our offices would be completely consumed with beer samples if we opened it up to home brews as well. Claudine asked, what are the best ways to use our leftover honey samples? Just enjoy it. My favorite thing is just to have honey on hand and to use it in my cooking or anything else. But also, as someone else said, combining different honeys in your brew, you could save that. You can, I'm forgetting the term of it, but basically combine different honey varietals. Big scale manufacturers, say General Mills and their Honey Nut Cheerios, they actually are not buying honey by specific varietals. They are buying by color. And so as we were tasting through those today, the orange blossom honey, while it still had amazing, great fruity notes, it's a lot more lighter than that robust buckwheat honey. So you actually can start mixing your honey varietals to still come up with a great, great honey to use in a future brew. Oh, and I think the questions are switching around on me. Yeah, Ashley, I'm sorry if you got 2 buckwheats. That probably means it was my fault because I hand packaged all of them. So there should have been an orange blossom, a buckwheat, and a meadow foam. Maybe it was also possible that one of them just got mislabeled. But regardless, Ashley, I'm sorry because that would be human error on my part. Is the Honey Beer Summit just for brewers? Is there one where I can just go taste honey beers? So yes, the Honey Beer Summit is just for brewers. These are all virtual right now. Before the pandemic, we used to have 2 of these a year, one in Austin, Texas with Chester King Brewery, and then we would host one in St. Louis, Missouri with Urban Chestnut, Side Project, Perennial Brewing. But with the pandemic, we are only doing these virtually. We limit these summits to about 20 to 25 attendees. You can have multiple people from the same brewery attend, but we do limit this just to brewers right now, and we keep the events small so that everyone can share their screens and we can keep the events super interactive. Regarding the percentage of honey used in beer slide, is that percentage against all fermentables? Brittany, I believe so, but email me about that. Again, still learning a lot about this on my end, and I can get you that answer. And I want to say Stay, and if I say your name wrong, I'm very sorry. You asked that, I know there's a concern about fake honey or adulterated honey from that crops up from time to time, particularly in regards to imported honey. Can you speak to how prevalent that actually is? I hear of a lot of conflicting information. So you pretty much said it all in your comment there. It pops up every once in a while, and then it goes away. So about 10 years ago, China was importing cut honey. Basically what they were doing was they were taking their honey, cutting it with sugar water and selling it at a very underpriced rate. That was adulterated honey. But a lot of people got caught. A lot of people got in trouble and actually went to prison over that. And China is no longer allowed to import honey into the United States. So it's something that did happen and was very big when it did happen, but that's not the case anymore. imported honey is very, very important for our country because, again, we produce less than 200 million pounds of honey a year, and we need over 600 million pounds just to sustain. You know, the brewing industry alone is using 15 million pounds of honey. I'm not that quick at math, but that's a big chunk of just that 200 million pounds that we're producing. And you're fighting with everybody else. You're fighting with Honey Nut Cheerios and Blue Moon and their honeymoon beer. So it's sadly one of those things that it gets brought up because someone finds a Google article on it and it pops back up. But no, the best ways for you to know if there is fake honey, which I've never found it. A lot of people tote it. If it's really, really, really cheap. If you find something, it's kind of one of those, if it's too good to be true, that's how you would know that it's that it might be adulterated. Next, Pamela asks, there was a tasting technique discussed in another session with honey water. Can you explain it again? I was not in on that session. My own experiences with honey water, a lot of times honey water is used in cocktails, and on the distilled side, it's basically using honey and water to make a cocktail, but I'm guessing that's probably not what you're asking. Can't really answer that question. I'm sorry. Let's see. I think I might have worked through all the questions. But if there's any more, I'm still on here. Please feel free to submit another one. If not, my email again, it's allison@honey.com. That's Allison with 1 L. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Oh, I think they're, or I might have just gotten upvoted.
Awesome. Well, if we don't have any more questions, this will be recorded and the replay will be available just after we close this out. I want to say thank you so much to Allison for coming on and sharing all this amazing information, tasting the honey with us, and being a part of this inaugural event. So thank you so much, and cheers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys so much.